You were in high-performing roles, going up the corporate ladder and promoted multiple times, doing everything that was expected of you. In fact, overperforming and overworking, which is very common for many women in leadership at high levels.
Transactional leadership skills that was historically seen in males. And women, in order to survive in this world, tried to act like men, more directive, more authoritarian, and they were not women anymore.
For decades, we've been told that women need more confidence, better communication skills, stronger executive presence, and we've invested billions of dollars in programs designed to quote unquote fix women for those specific skill sets so that they can rise. But as I and so many of my colleagues supporting women in leadership, including our guest today, have been saying all along, when you're playing a game with invisible rules written by somebody else, no amount of skill building will completely fill in those gaps and level the playing field. It takes multiple efforts on multiple fronts, right? So in this episode, my guest and I will be discussing the complex navigational challenges that women face at each step of the leadership journey, from early to mid and senior levels of leadership. And this is the experience that Dr. Alice Eagly, a renowned psychologist and social role theorist, coined the labyrinth of how women become leaders. We're going to share practical realities faced today, our own labyrinth stories and those of our clients, including the health impact of overperforming and what progress looks like. If you've ever had these experiences, if you're facing them right now, or if you are leading women and want to make a difference, this episode is for you. Hi, it's Dr. Mira Brancu, and welcome back to The Hard Skills. Today, I'm excited to welcome Duygu Alpteka Gursu. Duygu is an executive and team coach, keynote speaker, and best-selling author who has worked with leaders across more than 50 countries. She has nearly 3 decades of experience working with global corporations like Coca-Cola and Unilever. She's the author of Transformational Leadership, Inspire the Excellence Within, and Empowering Women on the Way to the Top, which is what I read to prepare for today's episode, especially. And welcome to the show, Duygu.
Thank you so much, Mira. It's so nice to be here today with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Excited to have this conversation. Let's start with your personal story. You were in high-performing roles, going up the corporate ladder, right? And promoted multiple times, doing everything that was expected of you. In fact, overperforming and overworking, which is very common for many women in leadership at high levels, but to the point of physical collapse and even surgery. So I would love to know, how did you find yourself in that situation before you found yourself actually like to the point of physical impact, significant physical impact? How did you find yourself overworking, overdoing, getting to that place?
Well, to tell the truth, the story began much earlier in the sense that as a girl, as a daughter, I was raised to be achievement-oriented person because that's like the only way to survive and to have an identity in the community, in the country, let's say, especially in this part of the world. If you have education, you can have a chance to lead your own life because you can select the career you want to have and you can take your own responsibility for your future. And this was followed by, great schools, great achievements, great companies to work for, etc. And actually, I applied to 17 companies when I graduated from university. 2 of them accepted me only, and I chose the one that I really liked. And in a year, I was asked to be transferred to another great company, which was not recruiting any graduates. So my 1-year experience in a certain field in this part of the world, let's say in Caucasus and Central Asian republics, was very valuable, and I was transferred there. And when I transferred there after this 1 year experience, I was expecting to be promoted with my background. They were getting me because I had this unique experience that they could benefit from. And they told me that, oh, we believe that you are a high achiever. You will be promoted in 6 months' time. Just, let's see how it goes. And we are very sure that you'll get there. But in 2 months, I got this colleague joining me in my office who had just 9 months more of experience. He was a guy, and he was recruited 2 grades above with
Wow.
significant salary gap, let's say, difference. And he had a
Wow.
company car, he had stock options. And, I immediately ended up in the HR room and asked, I'm sorry, you said my experience was not enough to be a manager. And here is this guy with 9 months more experience. And they said, oh, he has a unique experience. And that was shooting commercials. And until that time, I didn't. But I had this 1 year experience in the region, which was unique. And this guy didn't. So my uniqueness was overseen. And actually, it took me 3.5 years in that role to get promoted while he enjoyed his, manager and all the related benefits about it. And not only with that, in 3.5 years, when I got promoted, another male colleague of mine went to the military service for 9 months. And when he got back, he promoted together with me 2 grades. So he was one below, and with me, he promoted together. And
Mhm.
I was really curious what was going on, while he was, peeling the potatoes. Did he get any new leadership skills? Because at the time, I saw that many women friends I had was struggling with their, decision of having a child, because they were
Yeah.
thinking, will I have my job back? What will happen to my promotion? And this was so controversial. They go for 4 months of maternity leave, and they actually gain a lot of skills by building resilience, emotional
Mm.
intelligence, survival, and giving his life to another one. But the guy's going to the military service, coming back with a promotion. So at that time, I did not realize that the difference and the glass ceiling was that obvious. It was a big realization as I went up the ladder, promoting 6 times in my 12 years career with the company. I had to work like twice as much early in the morning. And I would see it in other women leaders that were before me. They were just like men, imitating men, very authoritative, directive giving, waking up at 5 in the morning, getting their kids to school, and then coming to work at 8, and then, coming back from work at 7 p.m., dealing with their kids until 9, and then working until midnight or so to, compensate for the time they lost. And what happened was,
Mm.
I thought I had no choice. I thought I just had to work really, really hard and more than males to keep what I have, to get what I want more of. So when I promoted to be my dream job, which was the marketing head of a great company I worked for, I thought I could lead the department and the marketing role in a way that would be more human centric. But things didn't work that way. Economic crisis hit, the general manager changed, there were gaps in my team, and I stepped into every role almost. And that was physical burnout on my end. I had a herniated
Wow.
disc for 7 years, and the doctor said, you just need to have an operation in 2 days. If you don't, you won't be able to use your foot anymore.
The message you got originally early in life is if you just have the right education and sufficient education, you will be successful, period. And you did get that education, and what you realized in the work world was, no, that's not sufficient. That's not enough. You were starting to realize that there's so much more to how the system was set up. And then you started also realizing that the women around you were having the same or similar experiences, and the experience of having to work twice as much included the before work and after work. Some of it is for some women, it's going to be, managing kids. And for others, it's going to be just like all kinds of additional household chores and expectations of managing a household that are typically fall on women, whether it's explicit or not. It is what happens. During the day, were there also additional things that felt like working twice as hard? You did mention one, which is you were understaffed, and for some reason, somehow, you found yourself in this situation where you could not get the resources and instead just stepped into all the roles, right? That is probably working even more than twice as much. Were there other things like that, or what about that situation made it challenging to get the resources?
Well, actually, I remember that I interviewed a few people for a very critical role, and it took my own managers to align with me 9 months, and we lost the person to another company, for example. They
Hmm.
didn't take the time to interview the person. So they thought,
Hmm.
she's handling it. She's handling the two roles anyway. We don't necessarily hurry up and create more resources. So I wasn't supported in any way. And it was expected that I give it all in for the role. And I remember my other colleagues who had kids. And at the time I was single. I didn't have time for my private life because I was just working 24 hours. I was traveling too much. I was working the whole evenings. And I would see with my other women friends who were married with kids, they would tell me, oh, I haven't seen my kid the whole week. Or I haven't seen my husband for 2 weeks because he also traveled and we just couldn't see each other. And I was like really feeling sad for them because that wasn't the family life or life I imagined. So I was staying away from any private relationship, thinking that I had no space for it.
So some of the things that you noticed about working twice as hard were like the ways that it impacted family functioning, and, how hard it was to balance having real relationships, having a personal life, all of those things. Was there anything else that you noticed about how the men who were being promoted and resourced, was that different at all? Were they also dealing with being understaffed and then expected to work just as hard, but it wasn't as big of a deal? Or what did you see as a comparison?
Well, what I saw was the leadership skill set that was required is kind of towards males in the sense that if you're authoritative, if you are direction giving, if you're the decision maker and the problem solver, that's what is expected from you. And so the same was required from women, but women's other skills were not noticed, like the emotional intelligence, like the collaboration, like the nurturing, like the learning and growth orientation. So these were not seen as leadership skills. They were just, nice to haves. So although these were really the skills that were wanted, but not really. The focus was on, I would say, transactional leadership skills that was historically seen in males. And women, in order to survive in this world, tried to act like men, more directive, more authoritarian, and they were not women anymore. That was what I noticed. They just didn't act like women. They wouldn't bring in their empathy, understanding, or their growth orientation didn't matter. They had to imitate men. So actually, when I had my master's degree and the professor asked me, what's interesting about your environment that you would like to dive into? in terms of leadership in organizational psychology. And this was the immediate topic that came into my mind. Something I lived through, something I'm noticing while I'm coaching executives all around the world. Women are facing a lot of challenges, and it's not their self-development. Because you know what? Research says that women leaders score much higher on leadership skills than men. They score much better in high school and university education. In most of the companies, percentage of women being recruited is higher than men. But as you go up the ladder, it really goes down. And I'll give you an example. In the company I worked for, 77% of the population was women, but only 10% of the top management was women. So men were making decisions and creating policies for women. And that's what we call unconscious bias. They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. And, I think the two challenges in what you were saying are, number one, leaders need all of these skills, right? Not only relational skills to build good teams and to create psychological safety and listening and communicating, blah, blah, not only strategy and, sales and being assertive and all of that stuff and agentic behavior, right? According to Alice Eagley, it is both. It's agentic and communal. It's both. And when you're socialized to be more one versus the other and value more one versus the other, you're really missing a lot. Now, you don't have to have all of that in one person if you have a very strong team and you also value those different kinds of skills that other team members bring. But if you don't, then you do need to have those skills. And what's happening in the workplace that you're describing is that we are devaluing a significant portion of what makes leadership work well and be effective, which is those sort of less tangible, more human related skills in favor of transactional skills, which are important but insufficient, right? So that's like one challenge. This is a really critical moment where we could really find opportunities to elevate our leadership by actually valuing multiple ways of leading. And somehow, the way that you're describing, like somehow we've ended up in a situation where you can have 77% of the population not represented by their leaders.
Exactly. And research shows that when women leaders are promoted to the top, let's say the percentage of women leaders at the top are equal to men, what happens is, this is Pepperdine University's 19-year longitudinal study, the revenue increases from 40% to 116%. This is very significant. So what you just said, the combination of the two set of skills, transactional and transformational leadership skills, when they get together, there is significant value in there. So this is in terms of revenue. The second research from Boston Consulting Group done in 2021 shows that the companies, S&P 500 companies who have more women leaders at the top, they have more market share based on innovation than the ones who don't have as many women at the top.
Which makes perfect sense, because if you think about it, women have very strong purchasing power and they want to see their needs represented by the companies they're buying from, right? I just remember the second piece of it, which is like you described how, some research shows that women have better leadership capabilities or competencies than men. And there's plenty of other research that shows, at the very least, if not better, equal, right? And more importantly, the challenge isn't the ability. The challenge isn't the competency. It is the perception of how, their competencies, right? And you have said leadership is not gendered, but the path to leadership often is. And I think it speaks to this piece that when you take research-based indicators of leadership competencies and you evaluate how well are women, men, whoever, meeting these competencies on paper. Great leaders have the same skill set, right? However, it is the perception that causes women to be seen as weak in certain areas that in fact are not weaknesses. And we call that a weakness misattribution. We're misattributing a weakness to something that is not a weakness, like the things that you described.
Exactly. And it comes from two main topics. One is the societal expectations and those expectations from the roles, because women are caretakers at home and nurturers. They are expected to be nurturers at work too. So when they challenge something, when they say no, or when they are very clear about what they want to say, it contradicts with the societal expectations. Oh, she's not nurturing at the moment. She's not softly embracing what's going on. So the second factor is the unconscious bias we just mentioned, because the people who are doing the policies are not first-hand users. Like we just discussed, half of the population is women. Most of the products are, sold to women, but, all these companies that are there to produce these goods are not led by women, or half of the population is not represented there. So that's another. And stereotyping is another. Like, doing something like a woman, like don't laugh like a woman. The language that's been used, especially in other languages, you would find, maybe not in English as such, but I think English also, manhood. It's not about, being human, manhood. So all these things actually bring in the stereotyping. So if a women, after coming from, let's say, maternity leave, people have the bias that she's going to be more emotional. She's going to be focused on other things. So she won't be enough to lead her department. She's going to be too sentimental. But, these are generalizations that are not especially true for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm curious to hear from you about is some people these days would say, why are we still talking about this? Women, now work full time and they're in leadership roles, and this is old thing of the past and it's not present anymore. And really, when, some of those stereotype words come up, some would say, that's old news. We don't do that anymore. But in your book, you described how like we're actually in kind of like this sort of even more challenging second generation bias, and even third generation we're moving into. How would you describe that, and why is that maybe even more challenging to address?
Yeah, like 5 years ago, when I was doing my research, I was hoping that things would have changed. So I worked with one of the leading FMCG companies, which is a global one. And when I interviewed the women leaders in the middle, what I saw was they were making their decisions to become a mom, not with their husbands, but with their managers, agreeing on the time that is suitable to get pregnant and go on a maternity leave, because they were still afraid that they will not have their job back, or
Mm-hmm.
their promotion will be delayed. So I was really shocked. What I had experienced was almost 30 years ago, but today the same concerns are still there. For example, when they come back to work from maternity leave, they are not supported in any way. There are some companies who are doing a great deal of work supporting women to get attuned to the work environment again with their new being, but most of the companies don't have any idea what women are going through. And just one little example is the breastfeeding room they have in the corporations, having the milk ready for home. And I learned that the room dedicated to women who came back from their maternity leave was 15 floors down the plaza. Can you imagine? It takes 15 minutes to get there, 15 minutes to come back, 15 minutes to, do your thing. In 45 minutes, they don't even have a, what do you call that? Breastfeeding room.
Yeah, I mean, I also remember because I had
Yeah.
to go through this myself. It was a similar situation where it would take about 15 minutes to get there and then, at least 20 minutes to pump and 15 minutes back. And the level of stress that I experienced and pressure to like actually produce milk at a very specific time within a room that I felt uncomfortable in, right? That affected my milk production and it affected my baby, obviously, as a result. And like, I luckily had a director who like understood this kind of stuff and found a better situation for me more locally, more comfortably, all of that stuff. But very few women have a male boss like that is so attuned that would know without me having to embarrassingly ask my, for the things that I would find like I would be judged on or I would be questioned about or I'd have to like rationalize, like why that room, even though available, doesn't make any sense, right? It's tiny, tiny things like that are like massively impactful. So I'd love for us to get into like those 3 stages since we're already talking about like early career impact on leadership, mid-career and senior, and like what the different kind of navigational challenges are. We've already started talking about the early career-ish or mid-career, depending on when and if you decide to have children in your family by birth. But before we get to that, I'd love to close out your own personal experience, the herniated disc that you experienced, and especially what impact did that have on you as you moved forward, thinking about the interaction of health and women in leadership and what we are not attending to?
Mm-hmm. In my recovery bed, I did think about what leadership is after all. What did I do wrong? How did I get there? And as a women leader, what could my other options be? And I realized that at the time, I really didn't work on my visibility as such. I was focused on doing the right thing, creating success story, but I didn't necessarily think about how I can make that visible. More importantly, I don't think I have leveraged my team enough. And I am not really sure I asked for the resources in a very assertive way. And in the meanwhile, I also noticed that I didn't realize the importance of physical well being. If you're not physically well, you cannot be emotionally or mentally well. So, health became the number one value for me after that moment. So, the first thing I'm responsible for is to be physically well. The second is emotionally well. And only then I had a relationship and I'm now married. I have a son. And, when I reordered all the important things in my life, they fell into their place. And I realized, what's really important for me? What are my values? It gave me, I think, a good wake up call on understanding what's important for me in life, what kind of a life do I want to live, and what kind of a legacy I want to leave behind. And it was interesting at that searching mode, I realized that I don't want to sell goods. I was in marketing, but I want to do something with people. I want to help them be the better versions of themselves, realize their potential, build resilience, and ask these questions I asked myself much earlier so they can reorganize themselves. In this soul searching, it was, I think, unique opportunity to realize that I wanted to touch people. But you could still be in a corporate world and reorganize yourself in the sense that, how do I build a life that is first making sure I have a physical well-being, I have emotional well-being, because those two support my mental well-being. And since then, it's been 17 years that I've become an executive coach working all around the world. The first 30 minutes of my day starts with exercise. And I don't rush to start the day at 9. I start at 11. I totally reorganized my life. I work from home. My husband also works from home. So we actually, I think, changed our memorized routines and we've developed our own. So having that courage to reorganize yourself, to relook at what you want in life, to reprioritize what's important for you. And that kind of gives the way to well-being, to success, because I now think I'm even more successful than I'm used to be.
Yeah. A couple of things I want to pull out of what you shared is that what you were doing before is overriding your needs in order to meet other people's success metrics. And a lot of people in
Yes.
general do that, but women are trained to do that. Women are trained to serve others, to grow others, to develop others, to whatever that is, whether it's in the household or outside the household. And women are also socialized to not be visible. And so when you realized I wasn't visible enough, or I didn't leverage my team enough, or I didn't ask for the resources, part of that comes from just how women are socialized to not do that. They're not taught to do that at all. They're taught, like you found yourself, like put your head down and everything will just turn out the way it should. Right? Like, and that is not really the case. And so what you ended up really sort of realizing is actually I need to evaluate whether the people and systems and vision that I'm supporting actually also support my health and well-being and growth. And if it doesn't, what would? And that meant really understanding your needs and values better. And that meant being okay with the fact that you do have needs and values that are worthy of attention and worthy of resourcing, right? Like all of that stuff is an unlearning and relearning. And what I find very unfortunate, and I've heard so many of these stories, is that so many of us only get to that point where there's this pivotal moment of a health crisis, where like you're forced to stop and reevaluate. And my hope is that the work that you're offering, as well as like the work that I'm offering to support women, is can we try to not get to the point of that level of physical impact? Like, can we catch it sooner? Can we catch it earlier and find a way to help? And then how can you force that reflection without being forced into it?
Exactly. And that's what I love about coaching, because whatever leadership goal they have, at the end of the day, we go to the very roots of what they're looking for, why they're looking for, what's missing, what's possible. And when we do that, we touch all these questions of, who am I? What's the impact I want to create? What are my real values? And when they reflect on that, they find a way to better express themselves, to better lead themselves. And then I think they save us from the trap I have created for myself, even, and they reorganize in a way that serves them. So it may be about the way they run their business. It may be about the company they're working for. It may be having their own adventure. So there are various ways to do it, but I'm really, really glad that coaching creates that space for them.
You have actually coached people. I normally focus on mostly in the US, mostly in healthcare and academic settings. You've worked more in corporate and across 50 different countries. And what I'm curious about is going back to the levels, the sort of early career needs, mid-career, and then senior career needs of women navigating these systems and finding their path for leadership that makes sense. Let's walk through like each of those levels and what you see as very common across most countries, and then maybe some things that are unique for within certain regions or industries or things like that. Let's start with early career. We were sort of starting with early career and some issues around deciding on family and, bringing up children or fertility. I'd love to hear more about that first.
I don't particularly work with the women who start their career early, but from my own reflection and perception of what's going on, and also mainly from research, it's very important when they get their first promotion. It's kind of a critical time in which they decide if they want to go up through the ladder. And when they are not supported, when their potential is not realized, when they don't get any attention from the system to support them to go up the ladder, they give up. They don't set a target to go up. They don't have the motivation, and they work for the sake of just making money. That's what I have read and learned through research. And it's a critical point. Their first promotion. It's the one I also experienced at the time. For mid level, it's that time when they want to have a family, or growing their family, the pregnancy, becoming a mother, or managing more than one child. That is a very, again, critical time. Again, they make a decision at that point. Will it be worth going up the ladder? Will it be worth my time, my energy? Will I be able to manage it? Because let's face it, although there are exceptions, men don't necessarily share the responsibilities at home. So when women get home, they have another job to complete in a way. Even if they have a helper, it doesn't really matter. They need to spend time with their kids. They need to organize the family's social life. They need to take care of themselves. So they go for a second job afterwards. So that is another critical point. And the third one is going to the top. And that's about really the motivation. Up until 2019, research showed that women would only take up leadership roles when the system asks them, we need you in this role. You can do this. So they would do this out of sense of responsibility. And they would not necessarily think that they are natural leaders and they would take joy. They would feel joy about it, or they wouldn't necessarily calculate the costs and benefits of becoming a leader. But in 2019, there was a study which showed that this was changing with Generation Y. And what we see is that more of the women, Generation Y women, believe that they are natural leaders, and they start, calculating the costs and benefits of leadership role, and they start negotiating, which is a big change. And I think, this, because now information is more available. There are social and societal roles women are taking. This is changing, and it will change even more rapidly with AI, because you don't have to go to a maybe university anymore. It's not that routine path that will take you to a career. So I think it's going to change, but that is very important, determining the motivation. So if that motivation is really captured at the very beginning, then the companies can really support these women in the right way. It's too late to support almost a woman at the higher end of the medium, let's say, level, because, it's probably after a 30-year career or so. If they could do that much earlier and create a pipeline of women leaders, so the bench becomes a strength, then it means we're progressing. And for that, women need to support other women.
I was just going to say, what will it take for that vision that you are seeing? Like now, if we have women who have an interest, but they're also calculating very thoughtfully, is this worth it for me? Is the environment ready for what I have to offer, or have like the support to help develop me? Tell me more about what companies would need to do to get to that final outcome that you described earlier, where you can actually see revenue benefit as well as internal benefit for the benefit of all internally, as well as the benefit of the company's outcomes from that level of diversity. Like, it's not that easy. What would it take from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that it starts with the recruitment policy. Companies already have a lot of bias about what women want without necessarily asking them what they want. So, having a more equal recruitment policy, it shouldn't be the companies who are isolating women and saying, oh, they wouldn't travel or they wouldn't like that. This job is not for them. Let the women decide.
Yeah. Very paternalistic. I just want to highlight that for a second. It is, you might think that is thoughtful. It's actually benevolent sexism. It's very paternalistic to assume what a woman wants. So I'm just sort of like double clicking, highlighting on what you just said.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely correct. Yeah. And promotion policies are people, not even women, treated fairly when they get promoted. Are the same criteria taken into account? And I would say that the leadership skill set needs to be revisited as well. So it's not only about decision making, problem solving, strategic, but it's also about empathy, collaboration, growth and learning mindset, setting a coaching and feedback culture. And if we can really complete the picture with these skills, then the corporations would really see the value of women leaders. Then comes sponsorship. The males have all these social surroundings and environments in which they get together and they learn more about their role models without necessarily having formal mentoring and coaching sessions. And women, because they need to rush home to be with their kids and family, they need to have
Mm,
dedicated time to have sponsors and mentors. And I would say that the stars identified at the very beginning need to be supported in terms of training, coaching, mentoring, sponsoring, and they need to work with role models, not with the role models of the past, but role models of today and the future.
yeah. And before you go on to the next one, I'm just reflecting on that really helpful insight about if we continue to have some of this culture of making connections outside of work, whether that's like the golfing thing or the bars or whatever. But a lot of women, and I would say like other kinds of people too, can attend, like and people who are not drinkers are not going to go to the bars. People who, don't play golf, which is most people, like are not going to do that kind of thing, or it's going to be arduous. But in addition, even if you wanted to, if your family situation prohibits the ability to spend time outside of work, and most of the new generation does not want to spend time outside of work, it makes perfect sense what you were saying, that like, can we create the structures inside of work to allow for those kinds of critical mentoring, networking, and sponsorship connections? Yeah, great point. Yep.
Exactly. And also, I would like to make a special note of motherhood. I think it is part of women's life. Okay. I mean, they may choose to be a mother or they may not choose to be a mother, but at the end of the day, the ones that they choose are a big majority, and the corporations need to take special care of that. Like, what are the conditions these women are going through in terms of, do they have enough maternity leave? Do they have paternity leave? Do they let the fathers support women? What happens when they get back from maternity leave? Are they supported? That breastfeeding process, how is that going? And what are we helping them out with, etc.? Because that's a critical point. The women usually make a decision around that, and they think that they're not supported, they're not taken care of, and the costs of really going up becomes much higher. They are not seen, they are not heard, they are not appreciated. So why would they bother to go up the ladder then?
Yeah, I will add one more of these sort of like very specific, unique to the female body and experience later in life, as women are at probably often the height of their leadership roles. They're now also experiencing perimenopause and menopause. And for some women, the impact is significant. You know, they're going through sometimes lack of sleep, musculoskeletal issues, changes that cause anxiety, or at the very least, cognitive overload to manage all of those physical changes and experiences and hormonal changes and experiences. And somehow they have to hide it because no one's talking about it and nobody really attends at the same level or way or even policy as they do for motherhood. And so they're just sort of like bringing to work extra cognitive load that no one is really acknowledging, and yet functioning at very high levels, right? Are there policies? Are there other things that could help in the way that you describe how you navigate your own day, Duygu, like being able to ease into the day with exercise or having rest at certain periods of time to, you know, recover from certain things or manage physical therapy appointments or whatever that is. So I think that is also like another sort of next wave need.
Absolutely. And, 4 years ago when I was doing my project, I was not in menopause. And that's something I'm missing in my book because right after I got into menopause and I'm like, oh, this had to be in my book and it's not.
Next,
And I
yes,
need
the
to have
next
a
edition.
new edition in which I talk about that. Exactly. Because, yeah, that's another big human truth about women. And they are going massive, massive changes on a physical level, emotional level, which has an impact on mental level, but no women leader is dropping the ball. I think they are working in a way that is seamless, delivering absolutely wonderful results, and nobody's aware of what's going on for them. So definitely that's another phase that the corporations need to take into account as well.
I am looking forward to that next edition of your book. I love how you put it, like it's, you know, the human truth, you know, of what women are experiencing. As we close out, what is one message that you would like to have people leave with from the conversation that we had?
Well, I don't want women to accept the conditions they are working in. I want them to challenge these conditions. I want them to ask for what they need. And for that, they need to be aware of their needs and values. I want them to speak up for what they need. I want them to be more visible, more verbal about what they do, what they can do, and what they achieve. I want them to see and seek opportunities for them to show themselves. And finally, I want them to support other women so that this is not about, individual efforts, but I don't want women to think that, I've gone through this, everybody has to go through this. No, we can change that. So I want them to feel empowered to be able to change the, consequence of what we're discussing.
I feel your passion, Duygu. All right, everybody. If you want to learn more about Duygu's work, Duygu, let's find out what's the best way to find you online or out there and see more of your work.
Of course, yeah, I am on Instagram and LinkedIn, especially. I'm active there by Duygu Alpteka Gursu. They can
And
find
we
me
will
by
add
my
all the
book
links
and
in our show
by
notes.
my name. Yeah, that would be great. They can reach me anytime and through my website as well, www.duygualptekin.com.
Great, great. Okay, so what did you, audience, take away from today? And more importantly, what's one small change that you can implement this week based on what you learned from Duygu? She offered many ways to really lean into your voice and listen to what your needs are and to really become more visible. So share it with us on LinkedIn so we can cheer you on. If you liked this episode, remember that we love referrals, recommendations, nice reviews of the podcast, the hard skills. You can find it on our YouTube channel at Dr. Mira Brancu, DrMiraBrancu, as well as all of our audio podcasts on all channels. And if you're looking for more personalized support, you can also find me at www.gotowerscope.com. Together, we are going to navigate the complexities of leadership and especially women's leadership and emerge stronger on the other side. Thank you for joining Duygu Alpteka Gursu and me today on this journey. This is Dr. Mira Brancu signing off. And until next time, stay steady, stay present, listen to that voice that she mentioned, and keep building those hard skills muscles. Take care, everybody.